For us, going back and looking at our younger selves, we have more compassion and tenderness for our young selves. And I think you need self-love, and I think you need confidence in yourself to be able to face the world. And I hope people finish the book and feel that, you know?
Hey, it's Drew Ram for NME. I'm here with Tegan and Sara. I'm going to ask a few questions. So why at this particular juncture of your lives you decide to revisit your adolescence and publish this book and release the album?
We decided that we really wanted to try something outside of the music medium. Mm-hmm. We're obviously like storytellers, I think, first and foremost. So there's something sort of innate about deciding that we want to work on a project together, storytell, write, collaborate. But we've been making music for 20 years, and sometimes it's hard to get out of your patterns and those kind of like well-worn, I don't know, like not like shortcuts, but like we know how to make an album, and I know how to get there fast, and I know how to complete something and make it sound really, really good. But the idea of working in a totally different medium, it just raised the stakes. It made me feel really, it made me feel like I was like really like present and like not competitive with other people, but competitive with myself. Like I'm going to give myself this goal. I want to tell this story, and I want to get this message across to people, and can I do it within a year and a half? And like it just felt really exciting to give ourselves that challenge. And then specifically the material to focus on high school and our adolescence. For us, it very specifically lines up with our origin story. That's when we started Tegan and Sara. It's when we both figured out that we were queer and that we were artists and songwriters. And so it's those seminal experiences, because they all happened within that 3-year period. It's just, I mean, it's like a vibrant amount of material to sort of like pull from.
Who initiated the discussion?
Well, it's funny, actually, our book agent, we've known for over a decade, and he hadn't come out and said, you should write a book right now, but when we met him, he was like, you guys should totally write a book at some point. And he represents a lot of musicians who go into that world. And just every couple of years, he would bring it up again, like, I think it's almost time, like, you know, you'll know, the clouds will part, you know, and I think there was, in part, we hadn't figured out what story we wanted to tell, but also, you know, you have to have a certain amount of, I guess, history for publishers to care. And anyway, the clouds parted, and we were looking for something creative to do. I really wanted to stay off the road as long as possible, but I wanted to be creative, and I'm very sensitive about just writing to write. I don't want to just write songs and put a record out just because, well, it's that time again. So, but I know us, and we're workaholics, so yeah, anyway, we started talking about the book, and then we went to New York, met with our book agent, and everybody was sort of pushing us to consider writing about the beginning of our career, and I couldn't think of something more boring. No one ever asks, like, I mean, journalists ask about our career all the time, but no fans are ever like, tell me how you got signed. So we kind of were just brainstorming and talking about how we were much more interested in talking about, if we were going to talk about the origin story of our band, then we had to start in high school and our youth and blah, 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 and 3 hours later we had this pitch about high school. So we went home and spent a few months writing the pitch, and then all of a sudden we were like had to write a book.
Did you guys show each other drafts? How was the writing process like when you were writing it?
In the early stages, we had to show each other what we were working on, just partly because there were so many outside people that were involved in helping us like secure the publishing deal and sort of helping us kind of get on the right track. I mean, in the beginning it was like, I really loved having people reading the material, and then at some point our editors were sort of like, okay, go away now, like, you know, like quit asking so many questions, you got this. So then there was like there was a period of isolation where we, even within our own sort of
once we had the timeline established, I think we both were writing and giving each other access, and it became clear within a month or so of selling the book, like, oh, we need to like write a timeline, we need to just establish. It seems so silly now. Like, I actually think it seems ridiculous that we didn't do this to start with, but there became a point where it was like, oh yeah, we need to talk about what the story is and who's going to tell which part of it, and work on a timeline. And we sort of set up we're very Virgo-y, so we like, once we got into it, we really crafted a whole like architecture to the thing. And then, as Sara was getting to, we sort of even abandoned one another and just went to write separately, which is very similar to how we make music.
We didn't abandon each other. We just
well, there was a bit of, speaking for myself, there was a bit of like a good luck and like running off with my chapters to sort of dive into the story. And it's very similar to how we work on music. We don't really get in each other's faces. We really leave a lot of room for the other two. I think that's what's the magic of Tegan and Sara, and why we can continue to make things fresh and come up with new ideas, is we really don't crowd one another. And I think the two of us go out and collect ideas from different places, and it's the amalgamation of all those ideas that I think it makes us an interesting band. And I think we did the same thing with the book.
And what was it like reading each other's experiences within the book?
It was like reading fiction. I was like, I'm sorry, none of that happened.
I mean, it definitely was illuminating to see which parts of Tegan's story she focused on.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think that there was anything that was like a shock to me. Like, I mean, I was fairly well versed in what happened to Tegan in her high school experiences, but in some ways, I was more surprised by what she didn't write about. Like, and I think because without having, I mean, we certainly talked about the story broadly, and we also talked about this timeline that Tegan's mentioning. But I think, you know, to get into the sort of minutia or the textures of like, what are our emotions? How much of our interior life are we going to share? I know for myself, because I had these sort of like artifacts from high school journals, our the lyric books we used to write in, and some of the notes that I would write back and forth with my secret girlfriend. I had lots of contemplation around like, how much is too much to talk about? Can I talk about, like, for example, this actually is very me. I don't know why I acted surprised, but I was shocked to discover that I had saved these like sex notes that my girlfriend and I had written to each other, and I was like holding on to them all these years. And I remember having this long debate, you know, with myself about, is it appropriate to talk about my sexuality so specifically? Is it too? Am I exploiting myself as a teenager, you know, to share these really intricate and tender sort of fantasies like at that age? And like, I was having a lot of those kinds of conversations with myself, like wanting to push it, wanting to go far, make myself uncomfortable. I don't talk about those things in my music, so I was like, am I prepared to share this with a broader audience? And what will be what are the positives and negatives in that? So then when I got Tegan's part of the book, you know, I was looking for that. Like, where's that stuff that maybe went too far, or where has she pushed herself, or what has she exposed that must have been difficult for her? Like, those were the things that I thought a lot about when I was reading her chapters.
What was it like viewing your own coming out stories through like the lens of the past? Or each other's even?
I mean, I think for both of us it was really enlightening and eye-opening, like Sara was saying. I think there's a huge part of our interior life that we don't share now and we didn't share then. I think the misconception is that we must have always been best friends who told each other everything. We have this like trope of like siblings, specifically girls, and then on top of that us being identical twin girls. I think people imagined us whispering secrets into each other's ears. And
whereas in reality you were fighting all the
time.
we
were fighting. We were acting
like siblings.
Like normal siblings, I think we were much more like traditional siblings than people imagine. But also I think because of I think the dynamic of us both hiding and sort of grappling with and figuring out our sexuality, there was a self-consciousness, I think, that prevented us from opening up even more. And so I think reading the book was really cool because it was like, wow, that was happening for Sara. That's crazy. You know, I had an inkling, obviously. I had suspicions that things were going on between her and her best friend, and I watched her struggle to a degree, but reading the book is like, it's 100,000 times more than I imagined. And it's interesting because, like what Sara was just alluding to, I think Sara's looking for a story that happened for me that didn't happen. And I think that for her, she told this funny anecdote about getting my chapters and going to therapy and basically being like, did Tegan not struggle the way that I did? Like, is she a psychopath? How is this possible? But you know, we also had our first...
I never called you a psychopath.
No, a psychopath. She did call me a sociopath at one point, but...
very different.
But I think that our identity was formed at different times and at different rates because we are two individual people. And my sexual awakening happened 2 years after Sara's. I was more mature. I was older. There was less trauma attached to it. I'd also spent years watching we don't write a lot about this in the book, but many people in our social group were experimenting. And I think I just have a different interior, like, you know, set of emotions about it. So I think for both of us, it was really interesting to read it. And in a way, certainly for me, cathartic, because I've used music as a way to sort of understand Sara. When she sends me a song, I have at least an idea. Like, I feel she's alluding to where she's at emotionally. Even now, when she sends a song, I'm like, oh, so Sara's thinking about this, you know. We don't have a lot of external conversations about what's going on with each other. So I guess it was an extra deep look at who Sara was. Again, I know all of this, people are like, I don't understand, you're twins, you spend all your time together. But I think we keep a comfortable, respectful distance so we don't go crazy and murder one another.
And you had separate rooms as well.
Yeah.
So you're like individual people.
Yeah. With locks on the doors and everything, yeah.
There's a lot of famous scenes when you're like trying to get into the doors and one of you was crying as well.
I feel like one of the most common things that people come up and talk to me about the book is like they really resonate with the home phone.
Oh
like
my
the
God, yeah,
landline
definitely, yeah.
And call waiting, and in the live show I read from a chapter where I'm like, my boyfriend Spencer calls and I'm yelling for Sarah to hang up the phone, and every time it gets such a chuckle, but from a very specific age group.
It's very 90s thing, 'cause I battled with my sister about it. Like,
of course.
oh, it's phone time, it's crucial.
Yeah.
You mentioned songs, and I feel like, what was it like, listening back to your old music and hearing that teenage angst again? And how did you rework that to like a present day context?
The truth is that when I started listening to the music, what I really honestly heard was more just like the song mechanics of the songwriting.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't necessarily listening to like the teenage angst or even the lyrics, to be honest. I really just was sort of struck by how fully formed a lot of the material was. I really thought it was going to be sort of incoherent, or maybe more like songlets, like not like traditional pop structures. Like really early on in some of the demos that I heard, I was really struck that we were writing like pre-choruses or we were writing bridges. Like we wouldn't have used we wouldn't have defined them in a technical way, but it was really obvious to me that our background in piano theory and piano lessons, and then just I think listening to music so much, like being such fans of musicians and songwriters, we were really early on we were like mimicking those structures that now I would be able to say to you, well, most of my songs take on like an A B C whatever, like we were already doing that as teenage songwriters, and I was really like, oh shit, we were like sophisticated, but it was later that I really started to put the songs with the lyrics and start to think about like it started to give more dimension to the characters in the book. Like that for me was the real it was once I was through the awkwardness of like hearing us sing out of tune, or what does that lyric mean, there was these little moments of like for me observational moments of like, wow, I was really suffering, or geez, I was really talking through my insecurity about this relationship, or I remember after my first girlfriend, she moved to Montreal and she got a boyfriend, and I wrote all these songs after she got her boyfriend, and it's like really obvious to me what I'm singing about. And I was also really struck by the bravery, I think, at that age to be so candid, because very easily my parents could have just been like, it seems like you're singing about a girl, or like you're singing about a breakup, but you don't have a boyfriend, so who are you breaking up with? And like nobody ever asked me those kinds of straightforward questions. So I don't know, like hearing the music and hearing how candid it was really, I say joyful a lot, which feels like such a silly word, but like I remember listening to the songs the first time and like crying a little bit and being like, oh God.
Are you proud of your younger self then?
I felt so touched by my younger self. Like I just was like, oh God, I'm so fucking sweet. I want to die. Like it really, I don't know. It gave me this very human feeling about this younger me that I had sort of been scrutinizing through the memoir process. And all of a sudden it was like they were really a warm blooded thing that I was like, oh my God, little Sarah. Like, really could see that feeling.
Nice.
Yeah.
When you did your first show, there was certain criticism that you received. Now you've been in the industry for over 20 years. How are you facing any kind of criticism that you've gotten since?
It's a great question. It's funny because Sarah and I process criticism really differently, and we started to process differently right from the beginning. Sarah had a really visceral reaction to our first review, which was really negative. And it was negative in the sense that the person writing the review felt we were undeserving of winning this contest we'd won. We were 17. Most of the other bands that were in this contest were in their 20s. But at the same time that review came out, we also got the cover of the music magazine in the city we were growing up in, and a number of other pieces of press, radio, TV, another few articles. Within a few weeks, we had flown to Vancouver to be a part of another industry thing and got offered record deals. So for me, I don't see that bad review. I can't conjure up the emotion I have for that review because it's so tangled up in everything else that was happening at the time. And I actually really feel like that's kind of how I see criticism even now. Like I see recently I saw something that someone had written about us that was really negative, but I can't help but it just gets mixed up with all the positive stuff too.
Yeah.
And I think I weight the negative and the positive equally, which is that I don't give either one much weight. And so they all just exist. They're just opinions. I mean, they're no different than me walking past someone on the street and I can see that they're not into me. You know?
And you know, you iterate that in the book as well.
Yeah.
That with your first review, you kept telling.
Cool. In the context of everything else, it was
Yeah.
only one piece, and I
Exactly.
do think that that's been either like it's annoying to some people that I'm like that, but it's the way I am now, and a part of it is because at that time
Yeah.
I was so infatuated with this one person. And the fact that she loved me and she cared about me and she thought that I was good meant, and I valued that. I assigned so much more value to what she thought of me than anyone else. And that is just how I've always been. And so it doesn't mean even now if we get a bad review that it doesn't feel bad. It feels terrible.
Yeah.
But it's weighted differently, like than if someone I'm interested in or some, band that I really love writes like, we stand Tegan and Sara, Queens, and I'm like, well, Haley Kiyoko likes that, so what the fuck do I care about this stupid, like I just have always been that way, and that can be, what do you call me sometimes, is that it can be insufferable with my need to make things positive, and Sarah balances that. She's, her focus.
How do you feel about that, Sarah? How do you feel about criticism now?
Oh, well, I like to be really clear that, like, I don't think that there is anything wrong with a proper critique. I mean, I think that that's like a really effective way to learn about your strengths and your weaknesses. In fact, I think my biggest takeaway from the last 20 years is that for so much of our career, I felt we were missing out on an opportunity to learn from the people who were apparently qualified to judge and to grade the work that we were putting out into the world. And because I so often, it wasn't that I was upset we were getting bad reviews, it was that so much of what we were receiving in terms of feedback, I thought was sort of steeped in this kind of like homophobic, misogynist, sort of institutional bias. And because I could recognize that, it made it very difficult for me to just kind of brush it off. I felt like there was some sort of like responsibility to be part of, because we were because we were facing that criticism, I also felt like we had a responsibility to help like address it and dismantle it if possible. And I sort of took that on more of it as like I'm not just out here crying over like, you giving us a 2 out of 5 on your whatever your review. I'm here to tell you that you can give us a 2 out of 5 and you can say we're shit. But a lot of this language or these euphemisms you're using are really coded language around homophobia and misogyny. And I was really direct with people about that in the early part of our career because I wanted people to understand that. Yeah. I wasn't saying, God damn it, how can you not like us? I was saying, don't like us, but don't use the fact that we don't look traditionally feminine, or that we don't that we're not heterosexual, and people would be competitive with us. That's not what I'm saying, like.
Well, it's good.
Arguing.
It's actually really timely because NME once wrote a review of us and said that we were lovely even though we hated cock. And at the time, we made it into a joke, but it was awful.
Yeah.
Because it was like, oh God, like, so because we're not straight, like, we didn't have any of the language we have now.
Yeah.
Obviously, a line like that wouldn't float in this day and age. But at that time, in this weird, fucked up way, that was supposed to be a compliment.
Yeah.
And I think Sarah's right, like the coded language, sometimes very blatant and sometimes very coded, like language, we felt compelled to say something, but it was a different time, and so we would often go away quite injured. There was no place to put that energy. We would go to our publicist or we'd go to the people who worked with us, and often we would just make light of it. And I think we were told often you get trained to just be like, okay, that seems really offensive, but everyone's telling us we're lucky that they even reviewed our record, And I mean, look, we're Tegan and Sara. I mean, the next time we came to London, all the press were there at the show, and we introduced every song as like, this one's not about cock, but just to be clear, we love cock. We just don't like the men attached to it, or something. Like, we made jokes, and I think it earned us respect with a lot of the press because we didn't. But again, like, I mean, we had every right to be upset, and we had every right to not make it into a joke. But I think Sarah and I learned over the course of our career to behave a certain way, and I think Sarah's always been the one that's like, I'm not going to stand down, and I think we temper each other in that way, because I think Sarah would go after every single, and sometimes it's like pick your battles, but
Yeah, and how was it? Because you mentioned that you didn't have the language you have now.
Yeah.
You had back then. How is it facing high school trauma, especially, you know, like the homophobia and body dysmorphia that you discuss? Most people bury that away, but you guys went in, dissected it, and actually talked about it in the book. What was that like?
I just don't know what we would have filled the pages with. Like, I'm not sure what the story is without that sort of, you know, that's sort of the heart of the matter. It informed who we were then, and it informed who we ultimately became. And maybe most revealing to me as we're writing the story, this is why we attract the audience that we attract. And these are the stories they've shared with us. I mean, I don't get letters backstage from these, like anyone who sits down and writes me a handwritten letter is not like, really love mac and cheese and I'm watching Netflix a lot these days. I mean, these are like heart and soul traumas, suffering, heartbreak. People reveal some of their most deepest, darkest secrets. I can't tell you how many letters just on this tour I've had from people that say like, I'm queer, you're the fourth person who knows. You're the only, you and this person and this person. They will like give me an accounting of how they have come out and who they have come out to. And I think that there is something so intimate and sacred about that exchange of information. And I felt that if we were going to write a memoir, then we needed to really take those risks and show people that we were willing to reveal those parts of ourselves. There is so much that I don't talk about in the book that I only have in my own brain that I wouldn't share. But these things that are quite intimate, I think they were important for us to give to people. And also I found cathartic's not the right word. I don't know if it's catharsis, but it's like, it was important to me to articulate some of these things, even as an adult, like even this stuff around press. Like, it was really informative for me to go back and find that first bad review and really think about it. Like, this was a huge injury for me at 17 years old, to have an adult just shred us. I mean, really shred us. And to really, it wasn't that I didn't think, I mean, ultimately I didn't think we were a bad band, but she touched, whether she knew it or not, on a lot of things that I felt insecure about. I felt unsure that our friends and family, that they knew if we were good or not. Like, you know, my friends and family would be like, you're amazing. And like this little voice inside of me would be like, yeah, but they're my friends and family, right? Yeah. And that was one of the things they really focused on. You know, they really discredited our fan base because they were our friends and family. She made fun of the way we looked. You know, she made fun of, there was a coded thing in there about us being Ani DeFranco wannabes. Like, and this idea that, for me, Ani DeFranco was someone I had just discovered and really liked. And there was this shame of like, am I ripping off this person?
Well, also Ani had come out as bisexual, and we were closeted. So there was also something super triggering, like you're comparing us to an openly gay artist.
Yeah.
So
but it was really,
there was layers to it. And
it was really cool, though, to look at that and start to go, oh, okay, so then that becomes a sort of like baseline of like, here's my experience when I put myself out there. And it's the same with my body. It's like, or my coming out story, or my relationship to Tegan. I think it's like to go back to those kind of like first origin experiences and say like, oh, this really set up the framework for how I became an adult, and, you know, how I, you know, deal with these things. So it's valuable to me, and I like that people can then take the book and like find something for themselves in it, you know. I don't know, it's interesting.
And there's a lot of events in there that I feel like, you know, still resonate with teenagers today.
Oh, yeah.
Especially, I forget which one of you is in the classroom, and the jock in there.
Yeah.
He
just
starts making comments.
Just go on Twitter. It's happening right now.
It's happening right now. So
Yeah.
what advice could you give to teens these days?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because when we were working on the book, we met with a lot of publishers, and then obviously we spent the last year and a half talking about it, and we were really quick to point out that this was not just a nostalgic run down memory lane, that this was going to be a book with a million touchstones for people now, of any group and any age. Obviously, people from a certain age and group will relate, I think, deeply with it, but most of the universal issues that are happening to us in that book still happen to some degree, you know, now. And I think our hope was that no matter who read the book, they'd find something that spoke to them, and that they'd see a bit of themselves in us and our experience. I think we're culturally, we're very, right now at this point where everyone's going up on a pedestal, everything's curated and perfect. And I think for Sara and I, it felt like the right time in our career to step down off of that pedestal and remind everybody that we're quite literally just like them, that we came from probably, you know, look, for a lot of our fans came from very similar backgrounds, had a lot of the same experiences, and success and money and doing the job that we do has not changed, that we're insecure, that we suffered at times, that we suffer, like that we struggle with anxiety and depression, that we have gone through heartbreaks, that we have made mistakes, that we are human. Yeah. And I think that we all maybe this is scary for some people, but we all have that person that we look up to and we think that their life must be perfect, and if only I could achieve this, then I could be like them. I do it all the time. I'm like, I look at the new crop of young LGBTQ artists that are blowing up in music right now, and I think to myself, I'm so envious. Not of their success, because I'm like, oh, you're growing up in such a different time. It must be so much easier. And then I read their press and I'm like, oh my God, they get the same questions we did. They're struggling and pushing back in the same way. They're putting up huge posts on Instagram about the homophobia and the misogyny. And I think to myself, no, I'm doing the same thing people do to us. We think it's easier for everyone else. The grass is always greener. So for us, I really hope people take away from the story that we're so similar, and we, you know, it for us, going back and looking at our younger selves, we have more compassion and tenderness for our young selves, and I think you need self-love, and I think you need confidence in yourself to be able to face the world, and I hope people finish the book and feel that, you know. As a minimum, I hope people just think to themselves, LSD sounds really interesting, and maybe I'd like to try it. You know, there's lots of things in there.
Especially the first half of the book. That's all you guys talk about.
That's edited down. All I did. I mean, like I said, like a lot of the book became about our career and sexuality, but none of that happened for me until grade 12. So I was like, what am I going to write about? And I'm like, well, I did a lot of drugs and listened to a lot of music.
There's something too, like I was gonna say too, about like the shared experiences. Like, I think one of the things about, we would always tell people this, but there is this part of me that wanted to write the book to show people that our experiences were so similar. Like, we would always say, I don't know, like we weren't gay in high school. We weren't like out having gay experiences. We were like, you know, we were out with all of our friends who, you know, from the outside, everybody just assumed we were straight. We had boyfriends all the time, you know. And the truth is that, like, all of the goofing around and being little dirtbags and taking acid and skipping school, I mean, it has nothing to do with sexuality. It has, you know, the way that we connected with music and the way that we idolized and admired music scenes and the way that we participated culturally and socially in music scenes in school. It has nothing to do with us being queer. But then on the other hand, you know, it's really been in my mind as we've been talking about who our heroes were. People are always like, who did you look up to in high school? And for us, it was men. Like, we really I looked up to Billy Corgan. I looked up to Bruce Springsteen. I looked up to, Billy Joe Armstrong or Kurt Cobain. And like, you know, it wasn't because I didn't love women. I did. I loved so many women. I had so many female artists and bands that I loved. But I identified so strongly with male artists because I kind of wanted to be them, and I wanted to be like them, and I think there was something about...
Well, they were powerful and brazen and outspoken and anti-establishment.
Well, and they also relate... When I would listen to Billy Corgan, okay, like I knew he was straight. I mean, he was definitely like femme and sort of like androgynous. But when I would listen to Billy Corgan and he would sing these songs, I imagined myself relating to him. I assumed he was straight, so I would imagine him thinking about girls, and I was thinking about girls. And so he was someone I could relate to. And there was something so awful about the beginning of our career and feeling like my experience of connecting with men was totally erased because men couldn't connect with me. And I just remember in the early part of my career feeling like I love women and I want to connect with women and queer women are connecting to me, but there was this like huge part of my identity that was about men. And I felt like it just was gone because male journalists or the music industry in general was constantly reinforcing that I was for someone else, or my experiences were unique to this group of people. And in writing the book, I really also wanted to challenge people to think differently about that. Just because I was a 15-year-old queer girl growing up in Calgary does not mean that I'm any less complicated or more complicated than the average dude. Yeah. You know, like I crushed out on my girlfriends and I felt really tortured when they didn't want to go out with me. Like, you know, it's not that complicated.
It's actually interesting you bring that up because I noticed in the second half of the book, both of you start to become very aware of the male gaze.
Yeah.
And it happens a lot during the parties at Ricky's house. And there's that scene where you're at a friend's house having a sleepover and those strange men come into the house and get dragged out by the ankles.
Yeah.
How was that, writing that in today's climate, and especially in today's like Me Too movement, like going back and dissecting that and talking to each other about it and then talking to old friends about it?
It's interesting because that story, in the broader context of high school, we actually had quite positive relationships with men. Most of my boyfriends were totally decent dudes. If anything, I feel like I was cruel to guys because I would go out with them for what I determined was an appropriate amount of time, and then I would break up with them because I was like, all right, I did it. I really pitched in for that month, and now I take a couple months off. And I really felt like I was performing my heterosexuality, and that wasn't very kind to the guys that I dated. But I very purposefully left out the negative stories about things that happened with men, because I didn't want the book to become about talking about men and the bad things that guys did. I really didn't. And I was really, both stories you've mentioned, like with the homophobic kid in school, and then this story where these men broke into a sleepover and woke us up and dragged us out of the basement in this very terrifying episode that thankfully just ended up in them leaving us alone. But I picked those very specific things to talk about because for me they were more environmental. There was something menacing about men in general at that age because it was unpredictable. It wasn't my boyfriend didn't scare me. It was like men on the street that scared me. It was the thought that someone could break into my friend's bedroom and drag me and my sister and my friends out by our ankles. Like there was something so sinister about that. And it wasn't that I wasn't worried about being like our mom was working in sexual assault. I mean, we were very aware of the realities of your guy friend might assault you or those types of things. But I wanted to talk about the the really scary stuff that we were thinking about at the time and how that informed our relationship with men. And definitely we disagree a little bit about this when we started performing publicly and speaking with journalists. I remember feeling really uncomfortable having to talk about music with these male journalists because I recognized how much older they were than us. And my recollection, and I could be totally off base, but my recollection was that I had the sense that these men found us fascinating and also they were sexualizing us. And I remember having that suspicion that these men were asking us questions that were somewhat probing and sort of a little bit probably too specific about what are we writing about, who are we writing about, sort of leading us to this place where I was like, I'm 17, I don't want to talk about boys, I don't want to talk about sex, And we disagree a little bit about this, but I remember right away starting to feel like, ew, God, male journalists are so gross. Why do they want to ask us these weird questions? And I feel like Tegan was a little bit more like, who gives a shit,
Yeah, but again, it's context,
Yeah.
and I think that it was a cool experience to go back and remember all of that stuff. But memory's memory.
What was it like for your parents and Bruce to be reading about all these experiences?
I think it's again. The way memory works. We all remember different things. Like there were things that Sara wrote that I know for sure did not happen the way that she remembers. But I liked that. I liked that her book her side of the book would reflect what she remembered, and my side of the book reflects what I remember. And in most 90% of the cases, we had backup. We really fact checked our own book because we had a lot of material. But yeah, when my parents got the book, they do their own version of the fact checking. And in some cases they contested things that we were like, no, we literally have the concert ticket. We went this day to this concert. But they did something that I think is really common that we all do, which is we insert ourselves into a story between the lines. And I think when my mom read the book the first time, she was deeply hurt and really upset about parts of it. And then mostly just really self-conscious about how much we talked about our drug use and how bad we were. She felt really... I think the big thing that she felt was that she would appear like a bad mom and that she would appear like she was absentee. And I think that was so interesting to me because to me that was her filling in the in-between because that's not what's in the book.
Yeah.
In the book, she goes back to school and gets her master's and works full-time and takes good care of us and fights with us to get our grades up and gets us a tutor and drives us to piano lessons. Like every single person that reads the book is like, your mom is fucking amazing. But when my mom read it, she filled it in with her insecurities about where she feels she failed us. So that was interesting. She came around really quickly, loves it, loves the audiobook in particular. She's really into it. My dad did not write, he finished the book. His partner told us that he'd finished the book. Didn't talk to Sara and I about it. It was really weird. And then we went through Calgary, which is where we grew up, and he came and saw the show live.
Yeah.
And he came back after the first performance. And it was really cool. He was so articulate, but in this way that my dad is very articulate, but he was just like, I'm so moved. You both are beautiful writers. I can't, I was so moved by the book and your experience and the way that you spoke. I mean, he did a better job than even I can do, and I do this for a living. He loved the show. He told us we could retire because he was like, it's just perfect. So he was really moved. I think he struggled with it. He's not a major character in the book. A lot of his stuff got cut out because he obviously we didn't live with him. But Bruce is like the star of
Yeah.
the book. Our stepfather, who stepped in when we were 7, he really is the star, I think, parent, because he was around us most, because one of the big settings in the book, of course, is our home. And he was home with us in the evenings because my mom worked till midnight every night. And I think he's deeply, deeply proud of the book. Him and I talked a lot before the book came out about some of the stories we tell about him in the book. Obviously, there's a story where he calls Kurt Cobain a fag, and him and I get into a huge fight. And he was really, 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 like, he gave me his blessing to include the story, because here was this 6'4" construction worker, you know, worked at a steel mill when he started dating my mom, like very conventional, masculine, you know, sort of small town character. And he just was an exceptional parent and learned at light speed and kept up with us and never really, I mean, I don't remember him ever losing his cool with us. He did raise his voice from time to time, but other than removing the doors off the hinges, you know, when we would slam them, or taking our phones out of our room, he was an incredible parent to us, you know. So he really came off like the star, and he taught us how to be fans. He taught us how to love music. He taught us how to appreciate the culture around music, and he used music and its, you know, accoutrement as currency to buy our love and to buy our good behavior. And it was fun writing about them, and I think they're all really proud, but I think that they were all horrified by the drug stuff.
I can imagine.
Like, I think they all knew we'd experimented with drugs, but to know that we were sneaking out, you know, every night, and that we were doing drugs pretty consistently every single day and stealing from them, it doesn't add up to the people we are now. But
Or does it?
yeah, check your wallet.
Did any former friends, former partners, enemies come out of the woodworks after the book was published?
No enemies have come out of the woodwork yet.
There weren't very many people.
There's only a few characters in the book we write about who we aren't in touch with.
Okay.
So
Yeah, like we really tried to focus on telling stories that we could kind of be accountable for and to the people, you know, like there were a lot of things that happened in high school, and it was actually quite easy to say, okay, this is the group of kids that we've maintained a close relationship with, and I don't want to say I asked permission, but it definitely gave me peace to know that I could pick up the phone and call Naomi and say, look, I love you, and I love that we had this experience, and like, is it okay to share this? What can you live with me sharing in this story? And do you want to know what my intentions are with this? And that was a lot easier than, say, telling a story that, while it might be entertaining and like an awesome anecdote, like I didn't want to bring up anything that was going to be too painful, and I wasn't going to be able to like be accountable for it.
the publishers had a great way of putting it. They were like, don't kick a hornet's nest. So
Well put.
I think Sarah and I, we were purposeful about what we put in the book. The first draft was 2 times the length of the book now, and then in subsequent drafts we added sometimes hundreds of more words, and so a lot was cut out. And in speaking with writers, that's common, right? You write the full story. We wrote my dad's entire story, and then you omit 98% of it, just to get the shape. And I think we both were really courteous. As Sarah says, the real stories are, like, for anyone who was upset, it's like, we'd be glad we didn't tell the real story, like, there was a lot we left out, because the purpose wasn't a salacious tell-all. It wasn't to say, look how horrible and bad we were. The purpose of the book was to tell the origin story of our creativity and our identity as people, and that a lot of the stories that people are inserting between the lines that know us, that wasn't part of the story.
Yeah.
But they should be afraid, because if it's a big success, we might have to tell those stories. I don't know.
Lastly, how was it working on the album again that you worked on initially? Like, how was it re-recording those tracks? And
I actually found that I was I felt very emotionally disconnected from the material by the time we went into the studio, which is pretty common. Like, you spend so much time in that early demo stage, like it's not that the emotion has been drained out, but you sort of have like there's a distance needed or like required in order to like have perspective. Like, when you're writing something, there's enough edits and edits and edits and edits that by the time you sort of arrive at your final piece, it's not like that first like hard on the page, like blood, sweat, and tears kind of thing. And I felt the same way. Like, when I first, from the first time I was like in the Uber in Los Angeles listening to the demos that Tegan had unearthed, I was like, and then by the time we were in the studio, I was like, I think it's too slow. We need to quick, like, it was like you're already like in this kind of like, I don't know, just like, it's just you need to take a little bit of the emotion out of it. I just think
Do you
that's
have to
like what's
channel your
required.
inner teenage self?
I didn't. I felt like we were really adult. I mean, if anything, you know, part of why we hired Alex Hope, who produced the record, you know, beyond just being an exceptionally talented producer and fantastic fun to be in the studio with, she's like 25 years old, and we were like, we need you to be young. We
Yeah.
need you to put your young energy into this, because there is a different vibe, like when you're approaching things when you're young and it's your first time. And you know, we talked a lot about like these were the first relationships, the first time we fall in love, the first time we
The first
break up.
melodies we ever wrote.
The first melodies,
We didn't
yeah.
want to. I think we were really, at least for me, I felt grateful that we'd been writing the book for a year. By the time we went in the studio to make Him Just Like You, we'd literally been in those characters' minds, if
Yeah.
you will, for almost a year's time. And so I think we were both really courteous to young us. Like, I could have rewritten all of the songs entirely, and often felt the urge to do so. Like, there were times where I was like, these lyrics are awful, but they weren't. I was like,
Yeah.
these lyrics are just sweet and sincere and raw and real and exactly what I meant when I was 16 years old. And now I would write them to be more mysterious and complicated. And, you know, I think we had to constantly kind of pull back and say, like, no, like, we're doing justice to the songs, and that means not messing with them too much, and having respect for those young artists and giving these songs a second chance, you know.
Thank you for everything. This is Dribble Ballroom for NME with Tegan and Sara. Thank you guys for coming in.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.